So on this show, we have we do a different theme most days. The idea is eventually every day of the week will be its own special thing. Right now, on Friday, we do peace talks, where we try to reach across the aisle and we ask people to send in clips that represent their arguments well, and then we talk about them. Salty Saturday is not that. Salty Saturday is where we let ourselves be free to be salty. We complain because it's healthy. The thing that I want to complain most about was presented by Chris Hayes actually a couple days ago, and it is hypocrisy from politicians. Let's look at it.
So the argument from the Federalist Society, the anti-abortion right, at least some of them, for overturning Roe v. Wade was and has been that Roe wrongly took the issue of abortion rights away from the people, and that the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe then returned the democratic process to its rightful place and to the people in the states. Justice Brett Kavanaugh, in his concurring opinion, stated that argument quite simply. He wrote, "The Dobbs decision, quote, properly leaves the question of abortion for the people in the democratic process. Through that democratic process, the people and their representatives may decide to allow or limit abortion." Now, as poll after poll has shown, the people aren't that interested in bans on abortion, the kinds that have come in the wake of the Dobbs decision. Abortion bans are really incredibly unpopular. And so Republicans and conservatives have been using all sorts of increasingly anti-democratic subterfuge to have their way on banning abortion over the objections of the majority of their own voters. Take North Carolina, for example, right? Republicans in the state legislature recently gained a supermajority when this woman, Tricia Cotham, a Democrat who ran on abortion rights and co-sponsored a bill to codify Roe in the state's constitution, inexplicably switched parties. And she gave them a supermajority, and then conservatives and Republicans then used their new veto-proof supermajority to pass an abortion ban in North Carolina. Over the objections of the electorate, it polled pretty poorly, and over the veto of the governor, who's a Democrat and was democratically elected statewide.
Hold up just a second. How much does this remind you
To pass an abortion ban in
of
North
the
Carolina.
50s? Right? Like the 1950s and 60s in the United States. People just trying to have basic rights that are recognized everywhere else in the world. I should say, rather, all around the world. Not everywhere, but all around the world. Human rights. A person wanting the right to control what happens in their own body, for God's sake. The cops are out there dragging them away like they're doing something wrong. Just fundamentally, that should bother you, no matter who you are. Just fundamentally. Okay. Well, let's see. Let's see how fair they are about this. They believe somebody should not have the right to control their own body. There are circumstances where you are, apparently, according to the GOP, you are allowed to dictate what somebody else can do with their body. Are they at least going to play fair and let the people vote for it?
Over the objections of the electorate, it polled pretty
Nope.
poorly, and over the veto of the governor, who's a Democrat and was democratically elected statewide. So that's North Carolina. Now, here's what's happening in Ohio right now. That state's 6-week abortion ban is currently tied up in court. Its 22-week ban is still in effect. There's a coalition of organizations that are currently collecting hundreds of thousands of signatures to put the question of a constitutional amendment to enshrine reproductive rights in the state's constitution on the ballot in November. The people, right, voting. Or, in Justice Kavanaugh's words, to leave the question of abortion for the people in the democratic process. Similar efforts to support abortion rights have been very successful, even in states that are pretty conservative, like Kentucky. And Ohio Republicans and anti-abortion activists know this. So what they're trying to do is take the decision out of the hands of the majority of Ohio voters. They introduced their own constitutional amendment that would raise the ballot initiative threshold that has been in place for, get this, over 100 years, from a simple majority of 50% plus one to 60%. And Republicans are now trying to do this and get it done before that pro-abortion rights constitutional amendment can get on November's ballot.
All right. Couple unique rules for tonight. For the sake of making this fun for me and for you. And also for the sake of making this healthy, good training for all involved. I'd like Jesse to pay attention to this in particular. So nobody debate Jesse. I know we normally do the rule where we say one at a time. And that's fine, but it requires a bit of moderation. We don't have our normal moderator here, Wicked Foxy Dragon, doing well, she's here, but she's not moderating. And I'd like us to deal with the principle that's being talked about here. What is Chris Hayes talking about? In 2 states that he's laying out, Republicans are saying that government should function a certain way until they get what they want, and then they say it should function a different way so that nobody can change what they've done. In other words, it's hypocrisy. Now, I want everyone to deal with this openly. If you support this hypocrisy, you're going to have to explain why. And you should know that your opinion is unlikely to be taken seriously in any other political matter. You're like a soccer player, if you support this, that flops over anytime someone from the other team runs past you. We don't believe you're really injured. Let's watch. I'm not doing this whole thing, just this.
And get it done
opening segment
before that pro-abortion rights constitutional amendment can get on November's ballot. Meaning...
Oh, by the way, Jesse, that goes for you too. Don't debate anybody. Watch this. You can comment on it, by all means. But don't engage in a debate. I'll ask questions directly. Don't worry.
They want to put their own anti-democratic proposal up for a vote during a special election in August. Even though Republicans in Ohio themselves recently passed a law outlawing the majority of August special elections. Not to mention, a bipartisan group of Ohio election officials formally voted to oppose the Republican bill because they don't want to run a statewide election in August.
Come on. Come on. They said, no, we're not doing elections in August anymore. Wait, there's something we want to get a vote passed on. It's got to be August. We're going to do it in August. Votes only require 50% of the the electorate. We got to change that because 60% support abortion. We're going to up it to 60%. Why would we take anything a Republican has to say seriously ever again? They are not honest actors. And if you support them, you should know, we're going to tell you right now, in fact, you are now informed that you have been supporting dishonest actors. So if you continue to support them, you are a dishonest actor. Them's the facts.
The Republicans' play here is being challenged in court. But it's clear what's going on here, right? A maneuver designed explicitly to motivate hardcore anti-abortion proponents to come out in the dead of summer in a low turnout election so then they can move the goalposts and make it nearly impossible for a simple majority of Ohioans to decide to secure abortion rights in their state. No one has been chronicling this movement of anti-democratic, anti-majoritarian politics in states more than David Pepper. He's the author of Laboratories of Autocracy, a wake-up call from behind the lines, and the new book, Saving Democracy, a user's manual for every American. He's also the former chair of the Ohio Democratic Party, and he joins me now. Good to have you here.
Great to be with you, although it makes my blood boil to hear that summary.
It is really, it's almost, I mean, it's not comical because the stakes are high, but it's so, the sort of manifest pretext behind the whole thing always just strikes me.
It's outrageous. I mean, the whole sequence. And keep in mind, this legislature itself is the result of multiple violations of Supreme Court orders that this map is itself gerrymandered. So their legitimacy is already in question.
Right.
This is an...
I have to say, manifest pretext? We got to work on our language. We have to take our thesauruses on the left, and we should burn them. What the hell does that even mean? I get the vague sense that I understand, but I couldn't literally tell you what manifest pretext means. But yes, it's a lie. It's hypocrisy. It is a bunch of people being dishonest in government. That is it put in English.
Unconstitutional map that led to these guys in the first place. So we're piling lawlessness on top of lawlessness over and over again, and this is what you get when that happens.
Right, because it's one of these states. It's not quite as bad as Wisconsin, North Carolina, but it's in the ballpark where you've got a state that's it's a pretty Republican state at this point. It's a +7 state, +8 in presidential elections, but you've got enormous majorities, right, in both houses because they set those gerrymanders.
They would not have had the votes to approve this measure a couple weeks ago without the illegal gerrymander that they're living within. So that's just one other level of lawlessness.
So they've got the gerrymander, and they use that supermajority to put this on the ballot. They're now going to.
All right, let's see if y'all were able to stick with it. Ooh, Anti-Corporatist says, I love that saying. Oh, God. Andrew Woznicki, it's hard to take you serious, Jesse. You spout MAGA talking points, then claim you're not MAGA and claim it's both sides. All right. Andrew, I appreciate that you're trying to reach out, but don't. It's difficult, but this is training. Oh. Am I muted? Not anymore. No longer muted. But yes, and Andrew, thank you for the heads up. But no, this is training, and it's as much training in ignoring as it is in engaging. So don't engage right now. Jesse, is he claiming only Republicans gerrymander? No, and that's a great question. He's certainly not presenting the fact that Democrats gerrymander as well, and that's a fact. In fact, Democrats do engage. I know. Andrew Woznicki, I'm sorry. I'm on a slight delay with the stream processing, but I do appreciate the heads up because one day I will fail to catch it. By one day, I mean almost every day. So in answer to Jesse's question, because I want to use this as training for all of us, myself, Jesse, Andrew, the anti-corporatist, Lulu girl, all of us. Just guns down conversations. In answer to that question, is he saying that only Republicans gerrymander? The answer is no, but it's understandable that you could be left with the impression that that's what he's saying. And let me just clarify, by no means do only Republicans gerrymander, but he's talking about what Republicans are doing with heavily gerrymandered states. Look at what they're doing. Deal with this. I'm comfortable. In fact, I'm delighted to rag on Democrats when they act unethically. And by the way, they act unethically. I have a deep loathing for a lady by the name of Nancy Pelosi and a fellow by the name of Chuck Schumer because they are insanely unethical. Kristen Sinema, when she was a Democrat, insanely unethical, voted against the minimum wage despite what she told her constituents. Joe Manchin, the worst trash we have in the Democratic Party. Guy owns coal mines, I believe. And he constantly votes in favor of his own businesses. But this country is not going to get better unless people who generally support either party begin to hold their own party to account. And certainly don't side with them when the other side is trying to hold them to account. Don't show support for villains. Now look, we could go on and on about how much Democrats suck. In fact, Lord knows I'm susceptible to it. But we're not talking about Democrats right now. We're talking about specifically the issue of abortion, wherein Republicans are going against the will of the people. And this is some sci-fi dystopian stuff, my friend. Forget for a moment whether or not you are a man or a woman. Just, it's irrelevant. Set it aside. We're all human beings, yes? Good. Can you force someone to give birth? Is that okay to force someone to give birth? Some people, in these cases, in the case of RAPE, some of them were forced to get pregnant, but that's not the government's fault. The government comes in when they say whether or not, apparently, it's going to be mandatory that you give birth. Now, if that seems like the sort of thing the people should decide, I agree. And the chief complaint that Chris Hayes is pointing out here, and I agree with it, is that Republicans, which I call a criminal party for reasons like this, Republicans are insisting that people give birth, and they are taking the decision as much as they can out of the hands of the people. They are using gerrymandering, despicable tactics. They are changing the rules on how you vote. They're changing when you can vote. They're going against their own rules that they put in place, making it crystal clear that they will not hear the will of the people. And you should have a problem with that. I don't care what the Democrats did. You want me to say the Democrats are bad? Done. We have no argument there. Never have. In fact, I'll double down. I don't like Democrats. Find myself voting with them all the time because we have a two-party system. But this is not a discussion about who we should vote for now. It's a discussion about how we will allow the people who we have already voted for to behave. And if you voted for these folks, you have an obligation to keep them in line. These are your employees. You decided they should be there. You have a responsibility for them. That means you should be writing them and saying, what the hell are you doing? I didn't vote for a king. I voted for a representative. Represent.
They're going to put this on the ballot.
Sorry, I got a little bass.
Are they honest about why they're doing this? Like when they give the argument for why suddenly it has to be a 60% threshold.
No, it's a joke.
Well
I mean,
done,
they're saying they need to protect the Constitution. For the first time in 100 years, they have to protect the Constitution months before what you just described, a citizen-led ballot initiative to actually have the people vote on abortion access. By the way, when the Supreme Court came out with that opinion, it was gaslighting from the very beginning.
Sure, yeah.
They know that most of these states are gerrymandered. They do not reflect the people. Kansas showed that with its referendum last August. And these legislators know it. That's why every poll in Ohio shows that about close to 60%, and that's why that's such an important number, close to 60% of Ohioans support Roe v. Wade in general abortion access. Almost none support abortion bans, no exceptions, that sent that 10-year-old girl to Indiana who was raped. These guys know that, and as you've described, it's so blatant. They're moving the goalpost. But let's be clear. Now, I hope this comes out this way. I'm not sure it will. they themselves made a special election in August illegal.
Right. So
and they did not revoke that law.
Okay. So this is another great layer on top of this. So basically, they're on this race, right? They see the abortion rights advocates are going to get this ballot initiative in November.
Right.
So they're like, well, we want to raise the threshold to change the rules of the game before they can get there in November. So we have to have our election here in August.
Correct.
The dead of August,
Right.
right? Now, the county election officials, a lot of them were Republican, are like, what the hell are you doing? We don't want this, right? But they already passed a law saying you can't have special elections in August?
Yeah, and they tried to get the votes to repeal that law, but they didn't have the votes, so they just stopped trying to repeal it, and they're just saying we should have it anyway. By the way, the Secretary of State announced to those elections officials months ago the great victory of getting rid of these August elections. It was a bipartisan victory. The author of the August election idea himself said this was a career-long goal of mine to get rid of August elections. Months later, they can't repeal it, but they still demand an election on a date where it's currently illegal to have a statewide special election in Ohio.
So this is where we get back to these sort of layers of anti-democracy. So that challenge to the legality of this August 8th election is going to go to a state.
It's the Ohio Supreme Court.
And how are we doing over in the Ohio State Supreme Court?
Unfortunately, we had our Wisconsin moment a couple of years ago. We actually got ourselves an independent court.
Right.
Then they changed those rules and added party label to the ballot, moved those races up to the top, and now they have themselves.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah,
right.
There's another one.
The court changed hands.
It did. We had a moderate Chief Justice who was a longtime Republican who, with 3 Democrats, voted against every gerrymandered map. But in the meantime, they switched the rules of how we elect justices, like they did in North Carolina, and then violated for a year all the court orders. As I always say, if we saw this in another country, we would be saying, my God, you have no rule of law. Well, that's Ohio right now in 2023.
And it's
And on and on and on. That is the main problem that I have with the Republican Party. The absolute phobia of a fair fight. To go further, talking about not representing the will of the people. To go further, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, that's a Democrat. Just to demonstrate for you that this is a matter of principle over politics. It affects politics, certainly, but it's a matter of principle. Governor Tim Walz vetoed a rideshare bill that would have raised he did this yesterday, I believe. It would have raised the wage of Lyft and Uber drivers. I'm not talking about whether or not you think that was a good bill. It's what the people said they wanted. Now, if Tim Walz would have vetoed that because he saw something that was an immediate harm that was not that was not addressed, that would be one thing. But let me tell you what Tim Walz did. It was Uber threatening to halt operations outside of the Twin Cities. We knew that was a tactic they would use. The people knew. But Tim Walz, let's never forget, particularly if you're on the left, never forget this. Tim Walz said the opinion of a corporation is more important to him than its workers. Now let's go back to these Republicans, gerrymandering, changing the rules when they don't get the outcomes they want. How much longer? Honest question for all here. How much longer do you think people are going to stay in their homes politely, waiting for a democratic society? Sort of the American reputation that we don't brook that kind of nonsense for all that long. We can do this a number of ways. The way I recommend, and what I'm spending all of my time dedicated to at the moment is telling you, whoever you are, wherever you stand politically, to take control of your elected officials. If you live in Minnesota, you got to be talking to Tim Walz. If you live in North Carolina, you got to be talking to your representatives. If you live in Ohio, you got to be talking to your representatives. And you have to insist that they fulfill the will of the people, even if you don't like the will of the people. Because otherwise, we go back to King George. I don't want that. Neither should you.